Hello everyone, welcome to the Bio 105 Lab, Exercise 11, Survey of Invertebrate Evolution, Part 2. So in this one we are going to talk about the individual phyla of the invertebrates. So starting out with our most simple ones, we're going to talk about sponges, the porifera. They are sessile filter feeders, meaning that they are attached to the bottom, they don't move, they circulate water through them to feed. They don't have any differentiated tissues, so they are considered parazoans. They have three types of specialized cells. All right, one of them are the epidermal cells that form the outside coatings on the animal. Some of them are the collar cells, or choanocytes, which look a lot like the choanoflagellates that we talked about in the protists. And then there are the amoebocytes, which act a lot like the amoeba that we talked about in protists. So these amoebocytes will crawl around throughout the animal. They will pick up food from the choanocytes, which are actively using their flagella to move water through the animal and filter feed, and take that to other parts of the organism. Placozoans, we'll talk about these real quick. They are a very simple animal, basically two layers of cells with some mesenchyme-like cells in between. We're still sort of debating their taxonomy, but they are a very simple animal, and the genera of them were, a few genera of them were discovered very recently in 2017. A German scientist actually found a new genus of these living in his fish tank. Okay, so now we're going to talk about animals that have differentiated tissues. So first we're going to talk about the more simple ones that only have, during development, have an ectoderm and an endoderm. These are the ctenophores and our cnidarians. So they are radially symmetric and only have those two layers. So first up are our cnidarians. These are our jellyfish, corals, hydra, sea anemones, those sorts of animals. Right? They have a single body opening that functions to both take food in and eject waste. A lot of them show an alternating of generations, meaning that in the same animal you'll have, sometimes they will have a free-floating form, a free-swimming form that is the medusa, that is very much like a jellyfish, and then other times they will have a sessile form that is very much like a sea anemone or a coral. Right? Some of them will use both of those, and some will switch back and forth between them. And they also have, a lot of them are active predators and actually have what we call nematocysts, which are basically little microscopic poison harpoons that they can fire, and they can take rather large active prey. Our ctenophores, all right, so these guys are called comb jellies. They used to be classified in with jellyfish and cnidarians, but we now know that they are a separate phylum. Right? They have cilia along their bodies that will beat and push the animal through the water. They are often bioluminescent, meaning that they can produce their own light, and they are aggressive predators of other jellies. Right? So you can see this is the open end of it. They will actually engulf other jellyfish, or engulf jellyfish. So now we're going to talk about animals with a more complicated body plan, all right, with an ectoderm, a mesoderm, and an endoderm, and this body cavity inside of that. Right? So all of these animals are going to have that more sophisticated body plan. First ones up are the LOPHOPHORANS. These are bryozoans, brachiopods, and Phoronidae. They're all aquatic. Some are freshwater, some are marine. They have ciliated feeding tentacles around their mouth, and they are all colonial filter feeders. They do show up from time to time because people will find them in fresh water. They look like some sort of weird gelatinous brain, and people don't know what they are. Rotifers, these are microscopic organisms or near microscopic organisms. They swim and feed with these cilia around the mouth, all right, that appear to be rotating around the mouth, hence rotifers. They have a complete digestive tract with a mouth and an anus. They are parthenogenic and sexual reproducers, meaning that they will reproduce by basically budding, where a piece will break off and become a new organism, or they will actually mate with another rotifer and undergo sexual reproduction. They can go through cryptobiosis. So this is a rotifer in cryptobiosis, where they will basically dehydrate and go into suspended animation, so they can wait out dry periods and wait until there is food and water again. And they are important filter feeders at the base of a lot of ecosystems, and they're important as food for larval fish. Now we got our flatworms. These guys have tissues and organs as well. They have an incomplete digestive system, meaning that they only have one opening that serves as both taking in food and ejecting waste. They are free-living and parasitic species. A classic example of free-living are the freshwater planaria. There are also marine flatworms, like these brightly colored ones, and then some of them are parasitic, like you've got our classic, this is a pig tapeworm, right, that lives in the intestine of pigs. All right, then we have roundworms. So these guys are the nematodes. They are non-segmented, right? So they just basically a smooth tube with another tube inside it and organs in between the two. They do have organs and tissues. They have only longitudinal muscles. Some of them are free-living. So we've got C. elegans, which is used as a model organism for developmental studies because they are clear, they grow quickly, and we can see everything going on in them as they develop. But then there are also ones that are parasitic, like these dog roundworms, that can be intestinal parasites and sometimes cause problems that way. There's also a species that will actually live in the vitreous of your eyeball. They're not very common, though. Then we have annelids. So these are the classic, what you think of as a worm, right? If you've ever dug up a garden, turned over a rock, you've seen one of these earthworms, right? So this is a nightcrawler. You can see all of the individual segments, right, that have hairs on them called setae. These are the oligochaetes, right? So our earthworms and our leeches are our oligochaetes, and then there are also polychaetes, which are these, like these marine species. You can see they're still a segmented worm, but they have these parapoda, these little extensions on each segment that help them to swim or move through sediments, that sort of thing. Most of these guys are hermaphroditic, meaning that each will have both sexes, both male and female, and so they will mate and both will end up fertilizing the eggs of the other. Then we have mollusks. So these are gastropods, which are snails, cephalopods, which are the squids and octopus, and then bivalves, which the classic is your clams. All right. They have no segmentation. They have true tissues and organs, circulatory systems, that sort of thing. Some of these are separated into males and females. The squids and octopus tend to be, but then some of them are hermaphroditic, like your snails, which will have both male and female organs. Tardigrades. So these guys don't really fit anywhere else, so they kind of have their own classification. They are tiny, microscopic, aquatic invertebrates. They live just about anywhere that there is water. Right? You can go out on a sidewalk, peel up some moss, add some water to it, and next thing you know, you have these guys. And they're also referred to as water bears. They are famous for being able to go into something called cryptobiosis, where they will dehydrate. In that form, they are basically in suspended animation and will are very tough. Right? We have actually taken these guys and exposed them to the radiation and vacuum of space, and then we add water to them, and they come right back. Right? Their most likely nearest ancestors are these weird animals called velvet worms. So these are sort of almost in between annelid worms and crustaceans as far as their anatomy. So our next phylum is the arthropods. So these guys are extremely widespread, extremely diverse, name an ecosystem, and pretty much at least one of these, if not multiple ones, have colonized it. They have an exoskeleton made out of chitin, all right, which is a hard covering, and then they have these jointed legs, and that's where the name arthropod comes from, is arthros, meaning jointed, and pod, meaning leg. Now, they are represented by the crustaceans, so we've got a classic sort of crabs, lobsters, and shrimp, and then you have the chelicerates, which are represented by spiders, scorpions, and things like ticks. And then we have our hexapoda, which are the very successful insects, and we also have myriapoda, which are the millipedes and centipedes. So these generally are going to reproduce sexually, but there are, like most things, exceptions to that. There are a number of crustaceans, a number of insects that can reproduce parthenogenically without mating. All right, so our final group of animals is a little bit different. Most of what we've been talking about so far are these protostomes, meaning that when they are forming, that first hole that forms during development ends up becoming the mouth of the animal. The next one we're going to talk about is a deuterostome, and during development, that first hole that starts ends up becoming the anus. And so we're going to be talking about these guys, the echinoderms. So echinoderm means spiny skin. They are radially symmetrical as adults, but they are bilaterally symmetrical as larvae. Right? So that puts them sort of closer to us developmentally. They are represented by our sea urchins, right? Our classic starfish, which if you take any marine classes, they will get very angry with you if you say starfish. They are sea stars, and are sea cucumbers. Okay? So sea cucumbers, they look kind of like a big slug, but you can think of them as being a soft sea urchin that you kind of flop on its side. So these guys are, they have a number of different sort of life strategies. Some of our sea stars are active predators. Your sea cucumbers tend to be detritivores, meaning they just sort of feed on the bottom on whatever organic matter they can find. And then a lot of our sea urchins are herbivores and will eat algae and kelp and those sort of things. So, to wrap up, our invertebrates are a highly diverse group of organisms. Right? Invertebrates can be classified by their anatomy and developmental history. We talked about that in the last one and sort of reiterated it here. Invertebrates are important parts of their ecosystems. Right? So, a lot of them form very large parts of the ecosystem. They are prey animals. They are predator animals. A lot of them are filter feeders that are taking things like algae and turning it into useful protein. So they are extremely important parts of their ecosystem. And they have basically colonized almost every ecosystem on the planet. Anywhere you look, you're going to find invertebrates, except for a few exceptions. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you in lab.